Imagine stumbling upon a room you never knew existed, only to find something that chills you to the bone. Hey guys, welcome to Jitters, and today we're exploring some of the creepiest scary room stories shared on Reddit. Stories that prove sometimes the most terrifying things are hidden in plain sight. So let's jump into some scary room Reddit stories. I found a secret room in my apartment. I wish I had left it alone. This happened 3 years ago, and I still don't have an explanation for it. I had just moved into a cheap studio apartment in an old building. It wasn't much, but it was mine. The place had character, creaky wooden floors, weird old pipes, and a landlord who was just sketchy enough to make me wonder if I'd made a mistake. The first weird thing happened my first night there. Around 3 a.m., I woke up to a faint scratching sound. It wasn't coming from outside, it was coming from inside my closet wall. I figured it was mice or something and tried to ignore it, but every night, like clockwork, the scratching came back. Always faint, always deliberate. One night, curiosity got the best of me. I knocked on the wall, and something knocked back. Nearly pissed myself, but instead of running, I did the dumbest thing imaginable. I started tapping in patterns, and it copied me. Now I was fully convinced I was dealing with a squatter. I contacted my landlord, who brushed me off, saying that unit's been sealed for years, no one's in there. I asked him what he meant, but he just told me to mind my business. So of course I didn't. That weekend, I bought some basic tools and started prying at the wooden panels inside the closet. It took hours, but eventually a section came loose. Behind it, a dark, narrow passageway leading into the apartment next door. Only there was no apartment next door. According to the building's layout, my unit was supposed to be the last one on this floor, but here was this hidden space that no one acknowledged. I should have left. I should have sealed it back up and forgotten about it. Instead, I crawled through. The space was dusty, cramped, and smelled off like old wood and something rotting. My phone flashlight barely cut through the darkness, but as I moved further in, I started seeing things. A small mattress, rotten food containers, piles of clothes that didn't look that old. Someone had been living here. Then I saw the Polaroids. Scattered on the floor were dozens of them, pictures of people sleeping, close-ups of their faces, their hands, their feet sticking out from under blankets. My stomach dropped. The walls of the hidden space were covered in more of them, some so old they were yellowing. And then I saw the newest one. It was me, sleeping in my new apartment from the night before. I don't remember running back through the tunnel, but I do remember sealing that wall up so fast I split my fingers open. I moved out the next day, didn't even wait for my lease to end. I still don't know who was in there. The landlord refused to talk about it, and when I checked the building records, there was never supposed to be another unit there. But sometimes I still wake up in the middle of the night, feeling like someone's watching me. And I swear I hear scratching. I found a secret room in my basement, and something was waiting for me. I just moved into an old house in the middle of nowhere. It was cheap, and I was desperate to get away from the city. I figured I could fix it up a bit, make it cozy, and live a quiet life. The basement was massive, filled with old furniture and boxes left by the previous owners. But there was this one door I couldn't open. It was rusted shut, and no amount of force would budge it. It was only a week ago that I finally decided to break it open. I grabbed a crowbar, thinking maybe there was a small storage space behind it. I was wrong. The door swung open with a loud, creaking moan, and the smell hit me instantly. It was like rot mixed with something sickly sweet. I gagged, but my curiosity got the better of me. I grabbed a flashlight and peered inside. The room was small, cramped, and the walls were lined with old, yellowing photographs. They were of people, hundreds of them, men, women, children, all staring blankly. But the thing that made my skin crawl, they were all missing their eyes. I wanted to leave right then, but something caught my eye. In the corner of the room was an old dusty box. It was the only thing in there that wasn't covered in cobwebs. I shouldn't have opened it. Inside were dozens of small glass jars, each one containing something dark and shriveled. My flashlight flickered, and I thought I heard whispering, like tiny voices coming from the jars. I don't know why, but I picked one up, and when I looked closer, I realized what was inside. An eyeball. I dropped it and it shattered on the floor. That's when the whispering turned into a low, guttural growl. I backed up, ready to run out of the basement, but the door slammed shut on its own. The lights in the room flickered and went out completely. I was plunged into darkness, but I could feel something moving, crawling around the room. I switched my flashlight back on, but it was dim now, barely lighting up the room. That's when I saw them. Faces. All around me, pressing against the walls, their eyeless sockets staring right at me. Their mouths moved, whispering, but it was like they were speaking in a language I couldn't understand. I thought I was going insane. I ran to the door and started banging on it, screaming, but the whispers grew louder, almost deafening. I turned around, and one of the faces was inches away from mine. It smiled, a sick, twisted grin, and I could finally make out what it was saying. "Thank you for letting us out." The door burst open, and I stumbled out, sprinting up the stairs. I slammed the basement door shut and pushed a dresser in front of it, but I could still hear the whispers on the other side. I didn't sleep that night. I just sat there, clutching a kitchen knife, waiting for whatever was down there to try and get out. I called a locksmith the next day to have the door sealed shut, but when he arrived, he told me there was no basement door. I took him down there and it was gone, just a solid wall where the door used to be. I haven't gone back down there since. I hear things at night, scratching like nails on a chalkboard coming from beneath the floorboards. Sometimes I catch whispers, faint and distant, echoing through the house. And every morning there's a new photograph slipped under my bedroom door. They're pictures of me, and in every one my eyes are missing. I found a secret room in my house with a strange mirror that shows a different family. I'm Jack, 34 years old, and life's been tough lately. After my divorce, I struggled to keep it together financially, juggling 2 jobs just to stay afloat. My daughter Emma lives with her mom, but I get to see her every other weekend. Buying a house seemed like a far-off dream, but when I found this old Victorian for a ridiculously low price, I couldn't pass it up. The house had charm despite its age and a few creaky floors. It felt like the perfect place to start over, maybe even have Emma stay over more often. Everything seemed fine until I found the hidden room in the basement. I discovered it while clearing out some old furniture. There was a slight draft coming from behind a bookshelf. Moving the dusty shelf aside revealed a narrow door, almost as if the house itself was hiding something. With a bit of effort, I pried it open, revealing a dark, narrow staircase leading down. Grabbing a flashlight, I descended the stairs, my footsteps echoing off the stone walls. At the bottom was a small, cold room with a damp, musty smell. But what caught my attention was an old, ornate mirror leaning against the far wall. Its frame was carved with unsettling, grotesque figures that seemed to twist in the flickering light. As I approached the mirror, I noticed something bizarre. Instead of my reflection, I saw a different family. A man, a woman, and 2 children, all dressed in old-fashioned clothing. They stood in a room that looked eerily similar to my basement. Their eyes were wide and vacant, and their expressions sent chills down my spine. Curiosity got the better of me. I reached out to touch the mirror, half expecting my hand to pass through. Instead, I felt something solid and cold, the woman's face. It was like touching a life-sized figurine, her skin cold and hard like porcelain. I quickly pulled my hand back, horrified. The figures in the mirror began to move, their eyes following me. The man stepped forward, raising his hand as if to press against the glass. I heard a faint, muffled whisper, my name being called over and over. The children's faces twisted into malevolent grins, their eyes black and soulless. Panicking, I stumbled back and fled the basement, slamming the hidden door shut behind me. I tried to convince myself it was just an elaborate prank or some sort of old art installation, but deep down, I knew it was something far more sinister. For days, I avoided the basement, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Strange things started happening around the house, doors creaking open on their own, cold drafts in the middle of the night, and whispering voices just on the edge of hearing. Tonight, it got worse. I woke up to the sound of knocking on my bedroom door. At first, I thought it was a dream, but then I heard it again, louder this time. They were calling my name. I grabbed my phone and checked the time, 3 a.m. I mustered the courage to approach the door. My hand trembled as I reached for the knob, but I stopped when I heard the voices. It was the family from the mirror. They were outside my door, their voices clear and filled with anger. "Jack, let us in." The man's voice was low and menacing. "We just want to play." The children's voices chimed in, sweet yet sinister. I backed away from the door, my heart pounding in my chest. The knocking grew louder, more frantic. The door rattled as if something was trying to break through. I'm writing this now because I don't know how much time I have left. They're not just in the mirror anymore, they've escaped, and they want something from me. The door won't hold much longer, and I can hear their twisted voices getting closer. If anyone finds this, please, don't come here. Don't make the same mistake I did. They're almost through the door now. I can hear the wood splintering, their voices growing louder and more frenzied. They keep shouting my name, and it won't be long before they break through. God help me, I don't know what they want, but I'm terrified to find out. If I don't make it, remember my story, stay away from hidden rooms, and never ever touch the mirror. Baltimore Aquarium has a secret room. Don't go in there at night. The group trip to Baltimore Aquarium is my strongest memory of my father before he died. It also happens to be the most disturbing. I was 7 years old at the time. The event was organized by our local Boy Scout troop, and the group had rented out the entire place overnight. Most kids brought their fathers, some games, and the biggest, fluffiest sleeping bags they could find. My dad was in between chemo treatments at the time. For a while, he wasn't going to be able to go, but he changed his mind at the last minute. I was thankful for that. Nobody likes to be the only kid without a dad. Most of the day stayed pretty standard. My father and I checked out every single one of the exhibits. I must have stared at the small sharks for hours. I loved watching them dart back and forth across the water. The place had all kinds of fish and land creatures. There were lizards in the south wing and a few undersized whales in the north. There were amphibians to the west, and even a few small mammals to the east. We spent most of our daytime traveling between those spots and the cafeteria. The coolest part was when the gates locked to the public at 8. All of the kids ran back and forth to slide across the tile floors. I must have witnessed 20 different risky business impressions. We told ghost stories, we played board games, that chatted along amicably about sports and politics, with flasks of whiskey hidden tastefully under their t-shirts. The boys stayed up until well past 2 in the morning. It was a really fun time. And then everyone fell asleep. That part sucked. I have always had difficulty falling asleep in places other than my bed. I guess I can just never get comfortable. The buzzing from my fan was absent. My favorite pillow, that always keeps a cold side even in summer, was missing. Even the warm, reassuring feeling that my mom and brother were not right down the hall seemed to weigh on my wide-awake mind. I stared at the fish drifting lazily through the tanks in front of us. I wondered whether they ever got used to sleeping there too. I thought about homework and girls and video games, anything but the concept of sleep. I started training my ears to listen for sounds in the night. I thought it would be cool to hear a crocodile kicking around in the mud, or 2 exotic toads trying to talk to each other. In the city, all of these noises were non-existent, and so I thought it better to soak them up while I still could. That was when I heard voices. They were quiet at first. Clearly they came from some other area in the aquarium, but voices tend to float in hollowed-out buildings with massive ceilings. I lied awake in my sleeping bag and eventually traced the source to somewhere by the south wing. I waited for somebody to wake up and hear it too. But my father snored happily. My friends were curled into their own bags like caterpillars. Out of the group of 20 people, nobody seemed to be bothered whatsoever. The voices started to get more frantic. One of them seemed to be arguing with the other. I heard please quite a few times. I also heard stop it, Gerald, quite a few others. The mystery became too much for me. I had to check it out. I made sure to keep my shoes behind to avoid the squeak they made on the floors. I stuffed my pillow into the sleeping bag to make it look like I had burrowed in there. Then I gave the group one last look to make sure they were all asleep, before heading towards the door to the south wing. I opened it and immediately discovered that the lights had been dimmed everywhere else. It became hard to see the path in front of me. I placed one foot after the other nervously and followed the sound of conversation. The one man sounded scared now. I thought I heard him crying. At the end of the south wing, there was a door without any sort of sign dictating its purpose. It almost blended into the wall, actually, like one of the ones you might see passing through the Lincoln Tunnel. I would have missed it altogether, but a small concrete block kept it wedged open. Somebody shouted. I knew the voices came from inside that room. And so I inched my way through the opening and tried not to move the block in the process. I had to suck in my stomach. But I made it and collapsed noiselessly on the other side to find my breath needed to be held once again. I was in a giant auditorium. That's the best way to describe it. The room looked as if we were in a movie theater without any seats. A 30-foot-high glass panel held back an enormous pool of water, just like any other ocean exhibit. But I could not see anything inside. You know why you're here, Gerald. You talked stop time to pay the piper, kid. I could tell at that point the voices had to be somewhere near the surface of the pool. They would not be able to see me from that angle. Even still, I dipped behind an empty garbage receptacle and listened quietly. I worried that even my breath could echo. There was a splash from somewhere above. A man floated gracefully down into the pool of water in front of me. He had a white jacket around his arms. It held them together. A piece of rope tied his legs together, and all of this was weighted by a large concrete block, just like the one that wedged the door. The man sunk without much protest. He only seemed agitated after seeing me. I stood up, unsure of what to do, and we made eye contact. He tried to scream. He tried to fight against the cloth holding him together. Tiny little air bubbles appeared all around him as he fought desperately for any hope of life. And then a shadow entered his peripheral. I could not see the creature itself. It must have been waiting in an unseen part of the tank. But the shadow surrounding the man indicated a shape that dwarfed him by 2 or 3 times. Upon seeing the beast, any trace of hope quickly drained from his expression. He looked at me one last time and pitifully went limp. The shadow moved quickly in response. I only saw a flash of scales, but they stretched as far as my eyes could see. One bite from dinner plate-sized teeth ripped poor Gerald in half. The creature swam back into the shadows, with the top piece still in its mouth. The bottom piece continued to float to the floor. I screamed. I screamed because I had held in so much. The weekend had been one of my happiest memories up until that point. I never expected anything to go wrong. A little mystery, sure, but full-blown murder, and by a shark of all things. If it could be called that, I know I was 7 years old, but that fish looked at least 30 feet long. And so I screamed when someone turned off the dimmed lights overhead. I screamed when a pair of gruff arms wrapped themselves around my waist. I screamed as their owner carried me back through the door, out through the south wing, and in front of a very concerned group of parents and kids. What happened? Is Matthew okay? Are you okay? What the hell, Rich? I looked up at the man carrying me and saw the familiar features of my father. He too looked shocked. The color had drained from his face. The adrenaline coursed so roughly through his veins that I could feel his heart beat through his chest. The lights turned on. A very official-looking security guard approached us from the check-in desk. He wore a brimmed cowboy hat and annoying spur boots. They clicked when he walked. You know, one of those guys. Even then, I thought the getup looked weird, and the eye rolls from a couple parents seemed to confirm my suspicions. I didn't recognize his voice. I thought I would. You do know that part of our agreement included not wandering the property at night. The Boy Scout leader spun on me angrily in reply. Did you do that, Matt? I nodded, still dumbfounded. Unbelievable. We are so sorry, sir. He hasn't caused you any damage, has he? The cowboy guard nodded gravely. Unfortunately, We are going to have to ask you to leave the property." The group moaned and groaned piteously as they granted me daggers from across the circle. "Why does somebody always have to ruin it?" one said. "Come on, Matt, why did you do that?" I tried to tell them that I heard something. I tried to tell them I saw something, but no one wanted to listen. My voice turned into a pitiful, nasally whimper, and all of the other boys called me a baby. The kids packed up their bags. Their fathers tried to figure out a way home. I looked back to my dad for some sort of response, but his face stayed white and scared. The cowboy guard addressed us specifically. "You, sir, you were back there as well?" My father nodded. "We are going to let it go this time, but I want you to know that we could be calling the police down here to detain you for a B&E. My father nodded again. I started to protest, but I could feel his grip tighten on my shoulder. "Thank you, sir." We exited the aquarium at 4 in the morning. Along with everyone else, I cried even more. But nobody listened. The cowboy guard watched us leave in the pouring rain. He had his hand on a radio. I tried to train my ears to listen. Somebody's voice cackled through the speaker every few minutes. Somebody who kept talking about Gerald. I asked my father a lot about that encounter. I asked him what he saw. I told him what I saw. But he didn't like to talk about it much. After the trip to the aquarium, his health really started to deteriorate. He passed away in the winter of that year. That trip became our last one together. I still visit Baltimore Aquarium. They don't recognize me there. This story happened years ago. So much of the place has changed. So I never see the cowboy guard anywhere. I never hear anybody talking about Gerald. But I like to look at the sharks. I love to watch them dart back and forth across the water. I like to look at the amphibians and reptiles and all the other cool animals the exhibits have to offer. Sometimes, when nobody is looking, I like to listen by that painted-over door. I have trained my ears well. All this time later, I am a perfect listener, and I can still hear voices. They sound scared. Found a video camera in a hidden room in my closet. There's lots of movies on it. I'm in one of them. Me and my family moved to Phoenix, Arizona from Tucson last year. We were used to living in tightly compacted neighborhoods with community pools and that whole lot. You know the deal, little to no backyard, every house has the same floor plan, etc. Then one day, my parents decided they had enough of cramped city life and decided they wanted to live on a horse property up north in Phoenix, closer to family and more job opportunities, among plenty more reasons. I'm not sure quite exactly what the main motivation was, though. The property they bought was pretty much built to house horses, sheep, etc. I wouldn't call it a farm, but it felt a lot like one. It was 3 acres of huge shade trees, dirt, and the occasional grass patch. It was pressed right up on South Mountain, high up enough so that at night you could see the Phoenix city lights. The house itself was luxurious enough, 2 stories, Spanish hacienda style, kind of old looking. I don't know much about the house's history other than that the previous owners were a flamboyant retired couple who decided Arizona heat wasn't their cup of tea anymore. Upon moving in on the first night, we encountered a pack of coyotes sniffing around the property line and a scorpion on the kitchen counter, so I don't quite blame them. I liked the house, I guess. It felt a bit barren and lonely at first, but a few months in, we had 4 houses, plenty of goats, and even a friendly chicken named Helena. The property was bustling, to say the least. I liked my school. Home life wasn't boring, and our family was okay. I settled in quickly. The only thing that may have hinted towards a bit of oddness was 6 months after we moved in. My dad worked as a truck driver for some time and had to go up into Ohio for a few weeks. He returned with a female Belgian Tervuren dog. The dog was already a little old, about 8 years old, and acquired right off of a Amish community, but that was good because it meant she was already experienced with animals. We named her Zasha, after the dog in the book Saving Zasha, and found she settled in quickly. She was pretty strange. She was very hasty about coming inside the first few nights. We assumed it was because she wasn't allowed to where she came from, but even as she got comfortable slipping in and out of the house, She preferred sleeping on the back porch, despite how hot it got in the summer. Though she adored running around the property and around the central parts of the house where most of the commotion would happen, she had a horrid fear of my bedroom. She was already reluctant about going upstairs in general, yet sometimes followed anyway. However, my bedroom was hell for her. We even one day tried to shove her in, and she promptly dug her claws in the floor and scrambled away. One night when we were hosting a small get-together with the family, we noticed Zasha was missing. The Arcadia door was wide open the whole time though, so we just presumed she was out mingling with the animals to hide away from all the people. We ignored the situation and continued on chatting and eating until all of a sudden there was a loud bang, followed by a symphony of vicious barking and growling. I've heard Zasha bark and growl plenty of times, warning signs to strangers, protecting her food from insistent goats, even at coyotes, and all had sounded downright intimidating at the time, but this took the cake. She sounded absolutely ready to kill. It made everyone promptly freak the fuck out and rush upstairs, only to find Zasha was directing her attack at something in my doorway. We turned the corner, expecting to find a snake or maybe even an intruder, but instead we find nothing. Absolutely nothing. Thin air. We didn't know what to attribute the loud bang to, but my family preferred to just ignore that and call Zasha old and delusional. We had to rip her away from the doorway and shove her outside, and even then, she clawed urgently at the door as if she felt the need to defend us from something. It scared me, but I avoided speaking up about it under the fear that my family laugh at me and call me paranoid. Flash forward to now. I'd just gotten home from school. The house was relatively empty as both parents were working and my siblings had sports practice. Zasha was sprawled out in the dirt under a tree, eyeing up the goats and wagging her tail when a baby goat sniffed her warily. I knocked on the screen door to grab her attention, not quite wanting to be alone in the house when I had a dog. Obediently, she sprinted towards the door and leaped through before making herself cozy on the cool tile in the kitchen. I had already grabbed a Sprite from the refrigerator and was ready to throw myself down on the couch and turn on the TV, when suddenly, there was a loud bang. Zasha immediately jumped up and began growling, pointing her body like an arrow at the staircase as if it were prey. I immediately felt chills run through my whole body. Forgive me if I sound a little too paranoid, but I'm a 110 LOB 5'3" female who has little to no chance of surviving an attacker. Naturally, I bounded over to the kitchen and grabbed the biggest knife I could find, convinced that if I was armed, I could maybe overpower the obvious intruder. Zasha beat me to investigating the situation as she promptly ran straight up the stairs and left me in the dust. Fearing the worst for the slightly too confident dog, I ran up after her. To my utter shock, she bounded right into my room, heart set on once and for all devouring whatever it was she was so scared of. My room is quite large and has a walk-in closet with no doors, so you quite literally just have to walk in. Therefore, it surprised me when she dove straight into the back end of my closet and began sniffing and snorting insistently on the wall behind my rack of clothes, even scratching. Okay, maybe a mouse in the wall or something is that I presumed. I know, doesn't explain the loud bang, but I was ready to try and rationalize anything. Still curious though, I walked up to where Zasha was snorting around and hesitantly pulled back the rack of clothes. There was a square cut into the wallpaper. It was door-shaped and could fit an average person, but was short enough that said person would have to crawl to enter. I, at first, did not realize it was a door. It doesn't really look like one, rather just a perfectly aligned tear in the wallpaper, but upon running my fingers along it and force shoving one in, I found it flopped forward and fell to the floor with a heavy clap. A cutout of my wall, all right. There was a light source from somewhere inside this crawl space, I guess. I am the biggest scaredy cat and would probably always live in a scary movie because of how I absolutely nope out of any potentially dangerous situation, which is exactly what I did. I got a peek of what looked like a room and bolted. I raced down the stairs and out the back door so quickly my thigh actually cramped because I moved so quickly. The first thing I did was race to the safety of the animals. Yeah, they can't help but other living things are comforting, and grabbed my phone out of my pocket. Zasha followed me a little more slowly and peering behind her shoulder every few seconds, as if she knew exactly what was happening and was more fed up than frightened. I dialed my mom immediately, but she answered with a choppy, "I'm at work, sweetheart. You know not to call me here. I get off in 15 minutes. I'll call you back. Love you. Bye." I was then hung up on. I tried next to call my brother and my sister, but both phones were turned off. I felt like ripping out my hair. I contemplated dialing 911, but what for? I needed emergency assistance because I found a crawl space in my house? What if there was absolutely nothing in it? In the broad daylight and with horses staring at me curiously like nothing happened, it felt ridiculous to freak out so much over something as simple as that. I finally worked up the courage to at least check what was in there after 5 minutes or so. When I went back up, blanked by Zasha, who no longer looked angry but rather curious, I found everything to be exactly the same. The cutout of my wall still sitting neatly on my floor and the bright illuminated hole still standing patiently. Slowly, I crouched down and peered through. Boxes, there was loads of them. This seemed pretty tame, and it seemed to be the only thing in there from my view. I would have never gone in there myself, but Zasha zipped right through when she realized I wasn't running away from it, and began sniffing around in there. I tried calling her out, but she just looked at me over her shoulder like a disapproving mother-in-law, and continued her quest for interesting scents. Feeling like she was never going to get out, I was faced with the reality that I'd have to crawl in and get her out myself. So I did. The room was so small that even at my short height, I felt the ceiling brush my head every time I took a step. A few steps in, as I observed the stacks of cardboard boxes, I came across something. A blue sleeping bag. At first, I froze, absolutely positive some psycho was right behind me and was going to clamp the hole shut and lock me in for all of eternity because I discovered their secret. But then I rationalized that maybe it was just more junk that happened to be spread out neatly on the floor coincidentally. So, I worked up the courage to approach the sleeping bag. As more of it came into view, I noticed a small camera positioned neatly on top. Next to it was a jar of salted peanuts. I would have frozen up again, and I did, but much more briefly this time, as I had already given myself enough scares for it to get old. I crouched down and picked up the video camera. It was an old-style one, the one that had a little flip-out viewing screen. It turned on and had a nearly full battery percentage. Just then, I heard the front door slam and immediately bolted out of the room, camera in hand. It turned out it was just my mom returning from work as promised. I immediately ran down to explain what happened, desperately. She at first was skeptic, rolling her eyes and throwing around the word "really" a few times, before finally becoming convinced and following me up the stairs. She poked around in the room as well. We found the boxes to be full of normal attic junk, old toys, figurines, blankets, and kitchen Tupperware. The sleeping bag and snacks were still there. When I presented to her the camera, my mom, always the better thinker, quickly said we had to view what was on it. Grabbing a fire something cord, I have little to no education on stuff like this, and some other things, she hooked it up to our TV. The first tape was of the mountain. South Mountain, to be precise. The cameraman was zoomed in on the mountain, recording the rows of red blinkling lights on the antennas at the top of the mountain before zooming out and giving a view of the street. Our street. He walks for a bit before stopping and turning to zoom in on our neighbor's house. He views them for a while before continuing to walk. At one point, the cameraman even points the camera downwards and zooms in on his own feet, which are covered in brown boots. The guy turns, and finally his camera rests on our house. There's a sigh from the cameraman, and then the clip ends. In the next one, it's daytime. The cameraman is in a parking lot. He walks confidently, normally, into a supermarket and begins browsing some watermelons towards the entrance silently. It's pretty boring, stretching out for a good 4 minutes or so, until suddenly he aims his camera up and zooms in on a cluster of people. It's unclear what he's focusing on until an elderly couple come into view. I recognize them immediately. They're the couple that lived on the property before we moved in. The cameraman keeps his camera aimed on them for the rest of the video. He moves with them, keeping a safe distance, but he never loses sight of them. He follows them through the whole store and peeks over aisles to get shots of them. Abruptly, the camera turns around to a store employee who taps the cameraman's shoulder angrily and inquires on what exactly he is filming. The clip ends. The next is the first absolutely alarming tape. It starts out with the camera pointed downwards, shaking as the man walks. It's nighttime and it's very obviously the side of our house. The cameraman stops as he reaches the kitchen window and aims his camera right through the window pane, where the couple are playing music loudly and sipping wine happily. They begin to playfully dance with each other as the old man talks about moving up towards Canada. They went through with this. The rest of the clip is merely watching them. For the next 5 clips, it's just the cameraman spying on them in dental appointments from their backyard, and at one point the cameraman slips through the door when it's left unlocked and he begins poking around their items. At one clip, the first thing seen is the front of the house, the man waiting with a ragged breath and presumably a bush. It's nighttime again, and he's very obviously excited for something. For the first time, we hear him talk as he whispers, "Come on," urgently. It's unclear what exactly he's waiting for until the old couple come outside to their lawn. The cameraman jumps up from a crouching position but then the couple is joined by 3 other people, a couple and their child. They're all carrying drinks and settle themselves in lawn chairs, clearly planning on spending the rest of the night lounging about outside. The cameraman practically slumps and sits down again. He watches them for 10 minutes until his camera points downwards. He has a gun laying neatly in his lap. The last clip the cameraman has of the couple is when they're moving. The final moving trucks come to get the last of their furniture, and the clip pretty much consists of the couple standing around outside, complaining about how hot it is, and barking orders at movers. The next clip is of a real estate agent. I recognize her immediately too. She is the one who sold us the property. She's walking around confidently, surveying the stables and the exterior of the house. She opens her cell phone and makes a call to somebody about how dingy the place is and how she'll never sell the dump without some major flipping, and looks pleased when it seems she wins an argument. She then leaves and the clip ends. The next clip is of me. This time it's positioned from inside the room. The cutout door is obviously taken away, and the cameraman pokes his camera lens through my rack of clothes discreetly to film me. I'm walking around angrily, arguing on the phone with my dad about how he never comes straight home when he gets back in town. I remember that day clearly. I finally hang up on my dad and throw the phone on my bed before walking out. The clip ends. The next clip is of that day that Zasha freaked out. The cameraman is positioned at the top of the stairs, lying down and trying his best to discreetly film us through the railing. Zasha is lying down on the floor boredly. The cameraman zooms in on her, then back out on the rest of the family. He seems to zoom in on everything, the food, each of our faces, and even at one point on my mom's ass. This goes on for an agonizingly long time before he suddenly accidentally drops his camera on the next step, creating the loud bang we heard. Even dropped, the camera still records Zasha jumping up and racing up to the noise. The cameraman scurries to collect his camera and all about throws himself through my closet and into the room. Zasha follows him straight in, barking and growling angrily. He tries to wave her away, but she merely snarls at him and tries to snap at his hand. With no choice left, he turns and grabs a small elephant figurine lying in a box and throws it at her. It hits her forehead and is enough to scare her into backing out of the room, but she still barks insistently at the doorway. The figurine slides under my dresser, and when the cameraman hears us clambering up the stairs, he plugs the hole with the cutout and waits with a ragged breath. Our muffled voices, concerned and confused, are heard in the room. The cameraman listens until we shrug and drag her back down the stairs. The clip then ends. It's not the last clip, there's tons more, with plenty of recent dates, but we don't bother to watch them. My mom called the police a while ago, and a bunch of cop cars came. I've been frozen in the corner for hours as the cops questioned everyone. My siblings came home. and were pretty angry at the sight of police and accused me and my mom of overreacting. They just vaguely heard snippets of us discovering a crawl space. But I hardly care if they understand. I'm still trying to process everything myself. I'm just trying to understand what caused the bang that made me find the room in the first place.